What's up, friends? This week we'll be talking about Kuroko No Basuke, male homoeroticism, and a little treat of homophobia, trigger warning for homophobia, and vague transphobia. Now, Kuroko No Basuke was a manga created by Tadatoshi Fujimaki that ran from December 2008 to September 2014 in Weekly Shonen Jump and was adapted to an anime by Production IG running from April 2012 to June 2015. It is known for its exaggerated, almost fantastical portrayal of basketball, and it follows the unassuming Kuroko Tetsuya and towering upstart Kagami Taiga as they strive to make their team the best in Japan. Along the way, they face Kuroko's old team, the prodigious Generation of Miracles. The level-up style of antagonists allowed for much of its target audience to be retained, but Kuroko No Basuke is also notable for having its popularity with a different audience. Now, Kuroko No Basuke doesn't have a lot of overt fan service on the male part, the same way that Prince of Tennis does. I would like to clarify for the uninitiated, fan service is usually referring to parts of an anime where a character is hypersexualized or made to look extremely beautiful so that it has a special appeal to certain people. So Kuroko No Basuke is interesting because it doesn't have the same level of fan service as others. There's one episode where they go to a bathhouse and you see a lot of vague, crudely drawn line stick abs, but beyond that, there's not much on the male part. However, it retains its popularity with not the kind of audience seeking the kind of power trip you get from watching over 6', 15-year-old Kagami break the hoop from a slam dunk, but a BL-seeking audience. The genre of BL, or Yaoi as it's called in the States, is a genre of fictional Japanese media about homoerotic relationships between male characters. Yaoi as a term was invented in the 1980s by fanzine authors as an acronym for the phrase Yamanashi, Ochinashi, Iminashi, basically meaning no climax, no point, no meaning, in reference to the lack of narrative in the genre of homosexual pornographic fanworks in anime. It originated in the 1970s as an offshoot of shoujo manga marketed toward women. One theory for their popularity is that female readers would find rebellion against the patriarchal norms that controlled them in these works. Another is that some viewed reading this as allyship for the LGBTQ+ communities, and others read it as a way of avoiding annoying tropes around women in romance anime or manga. That last theory is especially relevant in the case of Kuroko No Basuke. Just as previously discussed, the female characters of Kuroko No Basuke are few and far between due to the nature of the focus being boys basketball. There is Riko Ida, the coach of the Seirin basketball team, who has the most screen time out of all the female characters, but is referred to in canon as quote-unquote not sexy and quote-unquote not cute by most of the characters, so she isn't involved in much romantic subtext beside her relationship with team captain Hyuga. Satsuki Momoi, the manager for the Toho team, intensely collects stats and is best friends with Almine, but is mostly defined by her crush on Kuroko and as her role as fan service. Similarly, Kagami's mentor, Alexandra Garcia, is a women's basketball player from the States, and is known for being brash and also for being quite sexual with all the male characters. Satsuki was introduced in a bikini, and in the ensuing conversation between her and Kuroko, a serious conversation, the camera dives to make sure her ample cleavage or other titillating parts of her body are in view at all times. Kuroko espouses on his tragic backstory, and we watch through Momoi's thigh gap from behind. Alexandra Garcia is worse. She's introduced naked in a high schooler's house, then proceeds to kiss him and his classmates because of cultural differences. Only 1 in 3 scenes with her will have her dressed and not doing something like lying in bed with Kagami in the nude. Once again, it's played for comedy. Too much basketball in their brain, they don't know better than to shoot basketballs. Then, however, it feeds back into the homosexual viewing. He doesn't show interest in women? Why? Basically, the women of Kuroko No Basuke, Riko notwithstanding, show how women are treated more as fan service than actual characters in the genre. All that aside, the main theory for the popularity for boys' love as a genre is that it acts as a safe way for young women to explore their sexuality in a fantasy that doesn't involve them. How does this relate to Kuroko No Basuke? Well, in the first episode, Kuroko devotes himself to Kagami, declaring himself the shadow to contrast Kagami's light after he was abandoned by his old partner, Almine Daiki. In basketball, of course. Kagame and his childhood best friend got matching rings in their youth to show their devotion to each other, and he continues to wear it around his neck long after they drift apart, not being able to bear to throw it away, even as the other man begs him to. In a brotherly way, of course. And these are just two examples. While the intention was definitely platonic, there can be romantic readings to all of these situations, especially if you're looking for it like those watching for BL content would be. It should also be noted that sports anime, especially Kuroko No Basuke, functions as a sort of melodrama. Everything is heightened to the nth degree for maximum drama. Obviously, in the middle of a basketball game, a simple ankle breaker wouldn't be the cause of widespread fear across the court, but it's more interesting and dramatic if we do it this way. That way, sports anime sort of stands up to the other, more planet-destroying parts of the shonen genre. It should also be noted that heterosexual men are seen as less emotionally open. Male platonic intimacy is seen as less intimate than other types of intimacy because of this supposed emotional closed-offedness, and anything deeper than that will be a quote-unquote no-homo moment. However, in the sports anime's melodrama, everything needs to be exaggerated. That includes the bonds and the hatred between characters. So somebody that annoys you on a basketball court isn't just going to annoy you on a basketball court. You think about him every day. You devote yourself to learning everything about him. Because if your one goal is to be the best at basketball, and there's someone standing in your way, your focus is turned entirely on that person. A complete devotion to another person isn't necessarily romantic, such as in these rival relationships or with a friendship, but it can definitely be read as such. The same melodramatic emphasis applies to camaraderie amongst teammates as well. You're not just teammates, you're men in arms, you're brothers. Of course you would lay down your life for your boys, your high school basketball team. You do things like devote yourself to them or carry rings for them. Going back to Slam Dunk, I critiqued Haruka's place in the story as motivation. However, in most sports anime, male characters will also serve as the motivation for other male characters, oftentimes prioritized over female characters. As seen in Slam Dunk, Sakuragi's motivation for basketball as a way to win over Haruka was a more shallow devotion to the sport, or at least was portrayed as such. However, as he gets more into the sport itself, his motivations shift to include beating rival characters or supporting teammates as main goals. In Kuroko No Basuke, women are not even considered to be part of the goal of winning or not. They are, as I mentioned in the Prince of Tennis episode, comically disregarded by the basketball-obsessed male characters in favor of their obsessions with the sport and by proxy those playing it. So, bonds between the male characters are just more important narratively. Not only that, but because it is the boys playing the sport, they get more screen time, more time used to flesh out backstories and relationships from both sides. So it's a reciprocal relationship, not just a love projected onto another character, as with the male-female relationships. All this taken into context with the far more buttoned-up real-world views of quote-unquote proper male intimacy, these relationships can easily be painted as homoerotic. In response to this, I could find at least 1,000 distinct gay doujinshi titles for Kuroko no Basuke on one website alone. This isn't directly profitable to the show, but it is indicative of the industry behind such an audience. Plus, this queer reading of the show brings in a whole new audience, with none of the risk of portraying actual queer stuff on the studio's part, such as homophobia. Basically, the intense relationship that the dramatics of the genre require, applied to these strict roles of closed-off male intimacy in our current culture, paints these relationships as too intimate to be platonic, especially due to the growing audience that watches sports anime purely to watch it through this lens. There is one canonically gay character in Kuroko no Basuke. He's the vice captain and shooting guard of Rakuzan High, the team of the ex-captain of the Generation of Miracles, and is described interchangeably as homosexual and transgender. In Japan, and in other countries, being homosexual and transgender are often conflated, despite the differences in sexuality and gender. This is most likely in the case of Japan due to the Japanese history of cross-dressing, as discussed before. Being gay is seen as feminizing, something that is apparent in the character of Ryu Mitsubi. He's drawn with more feminine features, long eyelashes and sparkling eyes and the like, and he is referred to as Big Sister by his teammates. In the manga, the captain of the Seirin team, Hyuga, the only one seen to pursue an actual relationship with a female character, expresses his mixed feelings for Mizoguchi. He admired his shooting form and its elegance, but then the panel cuts away to a conversation he has expressing his disgust for a feminine gay man he saw on television. He just hates girly things, he clarifies. He hates girly girls, so of course he hates girly men. Thus the conflict of Mizoguchi. How could one man have the one thing he admires so and a quality he hates? Of course, one could argue he hates feminine things, not gay people. However, taking into account the conflation between girly men and homosexuality in Japanese media, and the special derision he gives feminine men, one can make an assumption. During the shooter face-off, though, he doesn't seem to have trouble with such conflicted feelings as Mitsubi's somewhat flirtatious threat is met with a resounding, "I have no interest in she-males, go and find someone else," according to the English translation. Again, I can't speak Japanese. Yikes, Hyuga. During the time of the show airing, in Japan, coming out was still not seen as a viable option for many. A Nijiro diversity questionnaire showed that 56.1% of the LGBT people surveyed did not come out, an impulse even stronger in smaller communities. Even out queer people were advised to keep it on the down low by their HR. And the same survey found that those interviewed usually found their environments too toxic to come out into in the first place. In the anime, however, much of the overt homophobia is scrubbed out. In the international arena, in 2011 and 2014, Japan voted in favor of the UN Human Rights Council Resolution to Human Rights, Sexual Orientation, and Gender Identity, and Japan also accepted a number of UPR recommendations in 2008 and 2012 to enhance LGBTQ rights. This is a little bit indicative of the culture that the anime went out into, and is something of a more positive spin than the things we've discussed before of culture and how it views homosexuality influencing anime. In this case, homosexuality was becoming a more accepted part of society, at least something seen worth protecting by some individuals, powerful ones. So the same overt homophobia seen in previous episodes and even in the manga were already being proven to be more controversial, which, of course, translates to more of a risk for the studio to take. Of course, Mizoguchi is far from good representation. His constant reminder of his status as the gay one pushes him to evil gay status, as the horror of him being a man advancing on another man being part of the horror of the antagonist. However, the anime's reluctance to show blatant homophobia, only a vague allusion to Hyuga's mixed feelings about Mizoguchi, and the doubling down on the appreciation for the elegance of Mizoguchi's form, leaves Hyuga's view of him to be almost homoerotic? Confusion and admiration doesn't fare well for the optics, at least. Mizoguchi lacks as actual gay representation. His queerness feels less genuine, more comedic relief. Now, all of these distasteful representations of queerness and the ones we've discussed so far can all be attributed to each being a quote-unquote product of its time. And in this way, sports anime is something of a time capsule, a litmus test for what was and was not acceptable at the time. Especially with a genre like sports anime, it rarely progresses past its time. Actual gay representation in sports anime was something far, far, far in the future. With all this, male intimacy inherent to the sports anime genre can lead people to view sports anime as inherently homoerotic, which of course garners an audience seeking homoerotic content. This, along with changing views of homosexuality in real-life popular culture, is part of what shapes the marketing of the genre, as we'll see moving forward. Anyway, tune in next week for our discussion on Free Iwatobi Swim Club, male objectification, and fujoshis.